maybe I read the Jesus thing. I was thinking about just
Ewan, we need to hear you.
I was thinking about being funny and just reading
Sounds assertive enough.
Catullus poems. Kind of sort of late era of the Roman Republic. His sense of humor surely got him killed. He made fun of Julius Caesar having sex with his main general, among other things. But and there's all sorts of hilarious things. He describes his dick as the mast pole of a ship. And he talks about jumping on unsuspecting people. He came across a couple having sex, and he jumped on them with his mast pole while pleading for the forgiveness of Venus. And then he dedicated the poem to Cato. Anyway, my brain's economizing. I'll try to find this. But yeah, he has some wonderful hate fuck poems, which I didn't really realize it was possible until I ran into someone with cystic fibrosis who had great hate fuck stories. Anyway, so read one Catullus poem here. And sparrow is slang for a dick in Latin. So sparrow, my lesbia's pet. Oh, by the way, underdog, I think everyone sees himself as an underdog unless they're like famous. And then they probably feel isolated and like a loser. That's my guess. But sparrow, my lesbia's pet, that she holds between her breasts and lets flutter in her hands and on her head, laughing as he chirps, coming to her again and again. She teases him with her fingertips, earning stinging pecks to her delight. I wish I could dampen my desire for her by playing with you, little sparrow. I would dream of her naked smell through your pecks to quench my miseries. So I was translating Catullus and I had a nasty bike accident. So it goes along with that. And I was actually coming down Avenue Road to college, and my front tire burst. Anyway, bleeding, and I ended up being carried to the hospital. And it was kind of hilarious.
Ewan, why don't you use the microphone or something like that?
Okay, bleeding and in pain, parts of my teeth on the road. I am carried the short distance to the hospital. The beautiful women on the streets stare at me, which is a delightful change, except that I'm covered with blood. Later I realize I'm going to live as I can take no solace from the emergency room art. Kitsch waterfalls with a lone fisherman standing in the water below. My head is numb. The nurses are lovely, though. They tease me for my art complaints, and I recite Catullus to them while they pick gravel out of my hands and face. They laugh at his ancient words through my voice, and that makes me dream they are two mistresses gently torturing the author of the poetry. This one was running around in the metro for about a year. I'm not really a romantic, but this is like the extreme romantic type poetry. He fell in love with this aristocratic woman who didn't really love him back, but I assume there was a fancy hay roll for all the fancy poetry that came out of it. But let us live in love, not listening to old men's talk. Suns will rise and set long after our little light has gone away to darkness. Kiss me again and again. Let me kiss you 100 times, 1,000 more, again 1,000 without rest, losing count so no one can speak of us and say they know the number of our kisses. So now I'm going to read the filthy stuff. 58. This is not, I don't know if this is invective or poetry. I'm probably closer to invective. Well, when you can't find it, okay, read a hate fuck poem. Okay, the woman, the Claudia Metelli woman that he was having an affair with was an old aristocratic woman. She ended up marrying somebody else, and so he wrote her a few hate fuck poetry. And this is kind of funny. And she apparently was a poet, and she wrote some nasty stuff back. That didn't survive, but this is what survived. But that's so much about what history is, and especially in terms of literature, it's what accidentally survives. And then scholars make a big do about that and pretend that's really what it was. But He is half crippled with arthritis and can hardly get hard enough to service her. She is made sick from the putrid odor from his armpits. You can consider yourself avenged, my friend. In bed at night while he is stinking and in pain, she must miss you. And more joy they stay, he has inherited all of your diseases. He apparently had quite a few diseases. Okay, and this is the one that may have gotten him killed. And anyway, this is they are a beautiful pair, Mamura and Caesar, sleeping with everyone in sight, and when no one else is willing, with each other. Is it any surprise they caught the same disease? One caught it in the city, the other in the country. Whatever the case, there is no cure for them. Rivals in the quantities of other men's wives, the literary pair are screwing almost without cease. A beautiful pair, Mamura and Caesar. Okay, this is one of my favorites. This is not, I was looking at this before, it's not quite, I don't know if it's really poetry as invective, but he names all the political opponents he has and describes lovely things about them. Otho, you have a very small head, and your brain no doubt wanders in that tiny space. Arius, your delicate unwashed legs attract dogs eager to relieve themselves. Lebo, the rotting smell of your wet farts clears the crowd as though you were a passing god. Fulficus, marshal, you senile goat, marshal of fools, these things don't offend you, so why are you offended by my verse? Anyway, he has some delicate stuff like the death of his brother. So I'll just read one more. I heard a rap guy going on about being the last troubadour, and it's sort of like, yo, I'm the last troubadour. And it's like, okay. It's kind of nice that troubadours are even brought up, and the whole culture was destroyed, but at one point a troubadour once meant something. And they were a master of poetry, a master of music, and their language was destroyed, the Occitanian language in the south of France. It was once the largest population in Europe, and they had a huge, I guess, kind of like a pogrom, really, against them. And their religion was completely destroyed. They were Gnostics, and they were the sort of the hippies of the medieval period. And so, maybe too heady, I don't know. But it's Guerreau de Riquier, the last troubadour. I should dedicate it to the big rap guy. But how bleak it must have been, the long, dangerous journeys between towns and courts, which gradually lost interest in your elegant, old-fashioned art. Influenced from the East, but transformed by the medieval Western obsession of individual experience. For us now, your world is utterly gone, disappeared with the figures and colors and the illuminations of your time. Your mastery was widely imitated before it slowly went unnoticed in your lifetime. Your main audience should have been the Gnostic Cathars and Albigensians that stretched across Occitania, which became southern France, into Spain, through northern Italy, into Bosnia and the Balkans. They supported the early troubadours and shared some of their values. You were 14 when their great stronghold of Montségur fell in the final brutal crusade against them. You would have heard living accounts of how over 200 Cathar perfects were burnt alive in an enormous fire near the Prat de Cramat at the foot of the castle. Of that time, Arnaud, the Cistercian abbot, who was a commander in the crusade, wrote to Pope Innocent III, "Today, your holiness, 20,000 heretics were put to the sword, regardless of age, rank, or sex. The older surviving Cathar sympathizers were a large part of your audience. They still admired the troubadours, but they slowly died off and you lost your patrons. For a while you worked as a poet for Almaric VI, Viscount of Narbonne, but you were not fully recognized. At 40 you crossed the Pyrenees and worked as a poet for Alfonso X for 10 years. Later you crossed back over the Pyrenees and wrote for Henry II, Count of Rodez, who gave troubadours protection. But times had changed. Court entertainers could sing the poems and songs of the troubadours, and do juggling tricks as well. Creation of original troubadour poems became superfluous, and you found no new patrons. In the regional economic decline, you moved back to the town of your birth and found employment writing religious poetry. No longer could you write of latent mysticism in the Gnostic language of God as all forms of love. The world had changed. The Catholic Church had won, and dissent was no longer an option. Jongleurs and minstrels called themselves troubadours, and the troubadours were no more. In your last known poem you wrote, "I remember my difficult past. I look at the merciless present, and when I think of the future, I have true reason to weep. I will have to stop singing, for truly I came too late." Thank you.